Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Being Responsible Show. My name is Clement Young, and I'm your host. In today's episode, I get to interview James Geering, who's been on the show before when it was called Unleash Love. James lives in the United States. He's an author. He wrote the book One More Light, which is about first responders. It's an incredible book. It's such a human book. It's a book that celebrates sacrifice, celebrates doing the right thing, celebrates caring for other people, and really brings light to, a lot of the trauma and a lot of the stresses and just situations that first responders have to put up with that maybe you and I aren't familiar with. He is a first responder and he's also a stunt actor too. He's a great guy. Very excited to share this episode with you. So please stay tuned. But first, before I do, I'm going to ad lib. I'm going to go off the rails on the news this week for the segment of this episode. So, what happened? Well, I think the story that I really want to share with you is about politicians doing the opposite of what they tell everybody else to do. You might be familiar with what I'm talking about. Recently, British politicians were found to be lying yet again about social distancing. They were having private parties all the way through the pandemic, not just now. And all that time, they were telling everybody to simply stay at home, social distance. And if you didn't, the police would fine you, they would prosecute you. And then at the same time, you've got Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, Dominic Cummings, all of these major politicians, the elite politicians in the United Kingdom, going against the rules that they set for themselves. Now, this show's about being responsible. I don't see how that's being responsible. In the bigger picture, I need to talk about these things because everybody right now needs leadership. Everybody right now needs to understand what's really going on because the impact of the rules and the regulations and the lockdowns and the impact it's having on the economy is hurting everybody. I mean, okay, there are people out there who are benefiting from this. I mean, just look at the stocks of Amazon, right? Just look at some of the stocks of the tech companies during the pandemic. They've shot through the roof. The crypto market's doing really well. There's a lot of new, wealthy, uh, everyday people who simply invested in whatever crypto they did at the beginning, and now they're really benefiting from it. So don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of great things happening and a lot of success happening for people all over the world. But in general, overall, it has been absolutely shocking just how impactful these restrictions and mandates and lockdowns have been. And we still have our governments pushing for them. We still have our governments pushing for social distancing, wearing their masks. And then we have these exposés in the media, right? And I feel so embarrassed and I feel so angry too, which is why I like to talk about these things, unabashedly in these segments because it gives me an opportunity to vent. How does it feel to know that your leaders, the people who you trust, who we have all elected, by the way, or have supposedly elected, um, going against the rules that they set for themselves? It feels like we've been wronged. It feels like we've been betrayed. It feels like we're playing a stupid game and like it doesn't matter to these people. What do they know that we don't know? Why are they not following their own rules? If this is a really serious thing where they need to say the entire country or parts of the entire country, whether it's the United Kingdom or the United States, remember, American politicians have also been found, like the governor of California, doing the same thing, having private parties. When is it going to set in that we're in social groups operating on different rules and different requirements? The people who don't have power, who don't have wealth, who don't have influence are being asked to do things that are above and beyond, that require us to cede the freedoms and the liberties that our ancestors, the generations before us, have worked so hard to claim, to put in place, and we're being asked to give them up, and we're being asked to do things that are unprecedented, like take vaccines against our will. Otherwise, we lose our jobs. And at the same time, we got these elites, the people with the power, the influence, the money, the politicians that are clearly not following the rules that they set. So I just wanted to touch on that. I wanted to remind you we've been segregated, and it doesn't make a lot of sense what's happening right now. And I feel like if the elites, if the people who we look to guide us are not following, just like children look to their parents, are not following the rules they set, why should we be following them? What's going on? Do we need to review everything? Do we need to reconsider where we're at right now in terms of sociopolitics? Do we need to maybe consider that there's another way that this entire pandemic can be handled and could have been handled? And what's the right approach now? Who's talking about it online? If these people are lying to us, where are the honest sources of information? And I've got James Geering on right now who talks to me about vaccine mandates and all of that stuff. So if you're interested in those things, which I'm sure you are, please stay tuned and let us know how you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Every single one we get helps. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.
Oh, this is horrible.
Before, like for example, before we start this conversation in the episode, there's going to be a segment where I just talk about like what's happened with the UK, for example, which I want to talk to you about, and the hypocritical government. Basically, they're in the news recently for being caught lying about having private parties and
I
social
saw the
gatherings.
British one. I think there's going to be a giant backlash. I really do. And I've literally just caught little snippets, I mean, lack of a better word, it's probably memes, but these are from all different British sites that I follow, and it's all the same message. So it will be interesting to see how that will pay off, because I got a funny feeling this time the British are going to be like, nah, not happening.
Right. I mean, yeah, I hope so. Right. Because how long is it going to take for people to actually start to realize what's really going on and to pull the wool from their eyes? Right. I mean, and I've got a lot to say about that. I've got a lot to talk about on that subject. Even Ant and Dec, who are a
Yep,
very
I saw it.
popular, right? Yeah, they did a little segment in their show. I think it was live TV, and
Hmm.
they really pinned it to them, and they really put them on the spot on national television. And I think that might be in line with what you're saying, is that maybe the British public now are going to be like, nope, I'm not going to take any more of this shit.
Well, and these are platforms that I think certainly aren't like anti-vax or anything. There's another one, Philip Schofield, and he
Yeah.
asked one of the British politicians. He was talking about his dyslexia, and he was like, "Was it dyslexia that made you, not follow your own mandates?" And I was like,
That
"Mike,
was
but
so
this is,
awkward.
these are all people from, again, a kind of spectrum. Like Ant and Dec and Philip Schofield, not the same animal on TV that I remember, and it's the same message over and over again. So yeah, we can definitely dive into that, because again, if you just take a step back from even that and talk about the underlying health message, what is being pushed versus what actually promotes health, that really dismantles any of the politicking. So I think that's the middle ground, common sense area that we all need to kind of gravitate towards, get away from the extremes and unify.
Exactly. That's so true. And it's something that really, it's inspired me to ask you come back on the show again, because your argument is a very logical one, and it unearths things that are forgotten. Like people forget about these things easily because, like you said, the two extremes of the argument are so distracting and so consuming, and it's almost like it's there for a reason. It pulls you away from what's logical. It distracts you with the stuff that will divide, that will keep you preoccupied, keep you scared, keep you. So your whole argument about, and I don't want to kind of detract from the course of the conversation, because we were talking about, hypocritical governments and things, and I want to get back to that. But yeah, uh, I think the arguments are very much focused on the extremes right now, and they have been for a while. But if we can just try to somehow pull people back to center, I would call it center, which is like just common sense, no
Normal.
emotion. It's
Hmm.
like looking at the facts. Then I think we'll be in a much better position.
Yeah.
But like, how has the situation, for you and first responders, and we were talking about vaccine mandates and things like that. What's changed since we last had a conversation for you, and um, how do how do you see the people in your uh, social circle kind of thinking of COVID now? Has it changed?
Um. So, well, what I have seen is it's an interesting thing. So, I'm English, and I'm sitting in Florida, and I'm a retired firefighter. So, um, in my state, where I was a firefighter for a majority of my career, our governor, Governor DeSantis, I've watched him the last 2 years be very middle of the road sensible about this whole issue. So when it first happened, our gyms were closed the same as everywhere else. Everything was locked down. Everyone, was like, okay, this does look terrifying. We don't know where this is going to go. We're seeing these kind of apocalyptic images from other countries. And so they did it. And he and his team, of course, assessed the numbers, and they were like, huh, okay, it doesn't seem to be and the magnitude that we were thinking about that would result in needing to close down all these businesses and cripple the entire economy for the cause of safety. All right, interesting. So then he opened you know restaurants, and we had outdoor dining, and we had the gyms open back up, and the parks were open, and the beaches and places where people can work on their health were opened up very, very early in the state of Florida. So then fast forward to these mandates, which popped up, a year and a half in, where if you haven't had a vaccine, responder who's spent 10, 20, 30 years of your life serving your community selflessly now is being called selfish because they didn't get a vaccine. And then now, I mean, I got vaccinated back in, I think it was June. Sadly, what they told me this vaccine was going to do for my own resilience, my ability to spread it, was actually wrong. So now we know all that information, and then you're now slapping these mandates, and I'm seeing firefighters, you know, have to leave their station, have to turn in all their gear that have served. I'm getting, I think another guest coming on is a member of the Canadian Mounted Police that just got fired after, decades of service. So I'm so proud to be in Florida. I'm so proud to have our governor, because I'm very, very, very open about my absolute dislike of most politicians and the system that creates this. We have a system that really pulls out. It doesn't seek leaders. It just doesn't.
Right.
We get usually these elitist people who clearly the good of the nation, the health of the people, is not at the core of their belief. It's not what they think about when they wake up every day. So for him, our governor has walked the walk with first responder mental health, with the summer cancer initiatives. So pre-COVID, I've seen him do good things. So I am very, very, excited. And it's funny because I just heard someone say Tulsi Gabbard, Ron DeSantis, 2024. I agree. Tulsi was Democrat initially until they shunned her.
Hmm.
DeSantis is Republican. Two human beings that actually seem to get it, actually want to make this country better. I would be 100% behind that. So,
Hmm.
I'm sitting in a place where I don't have to face mandates because I'm transitioned out. And retired is a very bad word because I don't get any pension. I used it to, keep the Behind the Shield podcast going. So I
Right.
reinvested. I'm an entrepreneur, as they say,
Oh,
or an
of
idiot,
course.
depending on how you look at it.
No.
But no, but then I see my fellow firefighters that I worked alongside be threatened with mandates and actually good prevail, and our governors say, look, yes, we want to encourage people to get vaccinated and all this stuff, but you can't tell people they're going to lose their job if they don't get a vaccine that doesn't even seem to be excellent in stopping the spread. It just that doesn't make any sense. But then on the other side, standing from this position, I'm looking at people in Canada, Washington State, California, New York, be dragged through this horrendous thing where I would understand that mandates almost more, still not, but almost more like a year ago when people truly believe the vaccines are working. But now, yes, they have a place, but it's really more symptom reduction than anything else when you look at it. And excellent. If you're someone who's at risk, and like I said, I got it. I was about to travel. I was going to see my grandmother who just turned 104. I was doing the selfless thing of getting vaccinated, and I don't regret it. But to take the numbers that we have now, the number of deaths are very, very low comparatively to a year and a half ago. The efficacy of the vaccine, sadly, doesn't seem to be even close to what we originally hoped. So the mandate thing to me is a complete slap in the face for the men and women who held the line, whether it was in the hospitals, first responders, military, whoever, that after all that selfless service, all the things that their families went through, and now to put this on them, I think is absolutely disgusting.
Hmm. Yeah, you and I both had our vaccine, right? And I mean, you did yours for your reason. I did mine because I wanted to be able to travel again. I now regret taking the vaccine. Not to say that I've had any, side effects that I can notice apart from an elevated heart rate for a number of weeks, which was scary. My resting heart rate was much lower. I don't know exactly the beats per minute, but before I got the vaccine, it was pretty low. I'm quite a healthy person, fit person. But when I got the vaccine, one of the things I did notice, and I hadn't changed my lifestyle, I was still working out, I was still eating the same food, I was still sleeping the same hours. What I noticed was my heart rate rose probably about 20 beats, which is a lot.
Yeah.
I couldn't like resting heart rate. I wake up in the morning and it was much faster than usual. Worried me because that's not normal, and I hate a fast heart rate. I hate the feeling of it. I'm a very health conscious person. So anyway, that was the only thing I noticed, which may have damaged me in some ways. I mean, myocarditis is no laughing matter. Not to say that I had that either, but I think it's kind of gone back down again. Anyway, what I'm saying is, we both got the vaccine. We were both skeptical of the vaccine, but we did it because we felt like we should for one reason or another. And now fast forward, and you've made some really good points there that there's data out there to suggest that the vaccine to prove that the vaccine isn't actually as effective as we were told. So it's almost like it was a bait and switch in a way. I mean, you could argue, how could they know? How could they know if the vaccine's actually going to be as effective? But then you shouldn't be making those promises in the first place, and lying to people and scaring them into taking something that really you don't know what's going to happen with it. And that's my whole argument against the vaccine. So it's a weird situation for some people to see someone who's had the vaccine talk against the vaccine. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, and I hate, or that's a very strong word, but I do hate the fact that now in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, an anti-vaxxer also defines as someone who is against vaccine mandates. I think that's a very scary development, and
Hmm.
it shows you where we are in our social situation, where it's somehow acceptable for a dictionary as popular as that to be able to make those claims, which I don't think make any sense. Like, if you're against a vaccine mandate, it means you're against the vaccine mandate, not the vaccine itself. I don't think that they're interchangeable. So, just to clarify, I have taken the vaccine. I don't think it's the only effective way to deal with this. I mean, we're neglecting all the other treatments that are possibly and have been shown to be helpful for this, right? I mean, we are at an extreme in this situation, And I think that's the reason why the I think that's the reason why things seem so out of balance right now, because there are treatments out there and there are ways that you could look at the data and say, well, if you just stop eating deep fried food and you have more vegetables and you work out and you get more sun and you laugh more and de-stress, those are going to really help you, right? Statistically going to help you to beat this thing or not get as affected by it. There's no conversation really about that. I've never actually seen a mainstream outlet talk about that, but that seems to be the major cause of death.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's something that I've talked about for almost 2 years now. And at the beginning, the reason why there's 3 episodes of the Behind the Shield podcast is because as this thing started coming out, that's exactly what I was seeing. All right, where's the discussion on underlying health? Where's the discussion on what we can control? We can't control this microorganism that's, spreading itself through the air. It's invisible, it's minute, but there's lots of things we can control. So I literally added another episode per week, which is a shitload of time and energy to put another, every week a third expert to talk about this. And one of the comments I've heard like over this last 2 years, oh yeah, but the vaccine is the low hanging fruit. We haven't got time to talk about the health. Well, here we are 2 years later. Imagine if we talked about that parallel with isolation, vaccine, whatever, other treatment modalities and prevention modalities, but we had discussed fitness, nutrition, sleep, exercise, daylight. Um, Fitness and exercise the same. But the community, time in nature, we would have a population that was 2 years fitter, 2 years leaner, 2 years, into mental practice, healing. We could have made such a dent on physical and mental health while we had everyone's attention. But rather than, what I think should have been done is like, okay, I want you guys to assume you are going to get the virus. We're going to isolate, we're going to wear masks, whatever, but assume that you are. So here are the things that you can do to start building up your immunity, building your resilience, improving your overall health, improving the chances of you not having a heart attack while you're cowering and waiting to get COVID-19. I mean, all these things that we as a paramedic and a firefighter see every single day. But it wasn't. It was shut down the gyms. You can get fast food delivered to your house. Oh, and we'll throw in alcohol now too. Don't go to the beaches. Don't go to the parks. Binge watch Tiger King, and just basically sit in there, shut up, and we'll tell you what you can do next. Which, when you look at the impact of loss of control on mental health, that's just another layer. So that when you then stand on your pulpit and say you're selfish if you don't take the vaccine, this is about health, and you haven't walked the walk on improving your nation's health, that to me takes away any strength of your argument whatsoever. Because if you cared about health, for example, fast forward almost 2 years, American schools would have no soda machines in there anymore. They would have switched to fast food and gone back to cooking regular food, which is not mind blowing. Before Cisco, there was just home cooked food in schools. The maybe there would be some incentives to boost gym membership, all that kind of thing. So what should have happened versus what happened are two very different things. And focusing on masks, isolation, and vaccines, and disregarding all the things that actually make the human beings healthier, you know, it speaks. Actions speak louder than words, and they certainly have to me.
Mm. Yeah, I had an argument with, it wasn't really an argument, with my assistant who helps me with the show about this. She lives in Germany right now, and there's a lot of stuff happening there um, that I don't agree with, and I think most people don't agree with, even if they say it or they don't. With regards to segmenting the population, segregating the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, not just Germany but also Austria, and I think now even before it was Australia as well. So, but what really shocks me is how the human psyche works. What really is terrifying, blindly terrifying to me, is just how illogical people can be. And when you get them in a group, when you put all those people together in a group, you get the worst possible outcome. And it hasn't even been 100 years, and Germany's government is now taking very authoritative stance of authoritarian rather stances on COVID and the pandemic and vaccines, and it's very reminiscent of the worst atrocity that's happened in recent history. And it's shocking to me how people can just blindly go through with it and not it doesn't click. I mean, what the hell is happening here? We're seeing a resurgence of fascism. We're seeing a resurgence of authoritarianism. We're seeing a resurgence of totalitarianism, in many ways. And I try to explain this logic to people about how I see the world, and how it's changed so much and not for the better. But they're still, tied to that argument that it's a pandemic. We need to take action. We need to protect people. We need to do our part. We don't have time to think about these things. We need to take the vaccine now so that less people die. And I just, it blows my mind. It blows my mind. People don't even understand what the alternatives on the market are, right? There are drugs out there that have been around for decades that have almost no side effects or none, that are very cheap, like anyone can afford them, that can treat this, and it's been shown on the Joe Rogan podcast. He talked about it. It's on many publications online. You just have to do the research. But we're not even researching this stuff. We're taking what the government's feeding us. We're taking what the mainstream media is feeding us. We're taking what those groups of people that are super, targeted, scared, are saying to each other, and it's amplifying. And we get to the point where we may be entering an era of just global authoritarianism, and we're not even realizing it.
Well, I think what I've seen, for example, here in the US, obviously I haven't been home much to England, partly because of COVID, is the ripple effect of a broken political system that excludes most good leaders. So, what better way than to cripple a country than to put, tyrants basically in power, divide the country, divide and conquer, and then, apply whatever kind of regime that you were thinking of applying. And I've seen that. I can't stand Trump. I can't stand Biden. I think, previous ones have been useless as well. I mean, you have to go back decades to find true leadership in the US, for example. And even in the UK, one of the ones when I was growing up was Maggie Thatcher. Oh, she was, she ruled with the iron fist. But then you look at things like the Falklands War and you go, yeah, but lots of people died. Could we have not have, used diplomacy to de-escalate that? I'm not sure. I'm not well versed in that. But, some of the people that we've hailed, has it really been for the benefit of the people? She was a union buster. I mean, so I question things that I was taught growing up in a pro-Thatcher family.
Mhm.
But when I look at it now, through this pandemic, what we should have seen is unification in all the countries. And I'm sure some countries, I would guess probably Scandinavia, for example. I know certainly Portugal, some of my family live there. We're banding together. We're doing this together. We trust our government. They've done things to improve our health before. We can have a healthy nation overall. Absolutely. We'll listen to you. What do we need to do? We're going to close down here. We're going to open back up. Okay. But then you look at here, the absolute polarization that was created initially by the Trump administration and now by the Biden administration is divide and conquer. And it's got a lot of people, family members, close friends that don't talk anymore over a vaccine, over wearing a mask. So, and if those were literally singularly the solution to this problem, then maybe it would be a little bit more understandable, but
Mhm.
they're not. Like, I mean, we've all seen people riding a bicycle in the fresh air wearing a mask. We've seen the person pull the mask down to have a puff of their cigarette. I mean, we're learning now, as we talked about, I don't know if it was in the recording or not, but the hypocrisy of all these governments that are telling everyone you have to do this, and then we find out they're having meetings and parties with
That's
no
what really
masks, no
upsets
social
me.
distancing. So it's divide and conquer, and I think that's it. It doesn't take much. It just takes good leadership to remind the country, hey, we're the base of the pyramid and we paid that person up there. And they're not in charge of us. They're the pinnacle. They can easily be plinked off the moment we stand together and say, no, we're done. But you allow us to segment and we're not a pyramid anymore. We're a bunch of little tiny, you know, strips, then it's easier to topple us. I
But
don't
it's
understand how we get to the point where police officers are okay with enforcing these mandates and everything, or military members. That's when it really scares me, because most police officers, I'm sure, would hate that. So we have to question the way that our system that even creates these so-called leaders. And if that's putting up, and as for example, in America, millionaire career politicians, or orange fucking lunatics that we had recently. I mean, and no, none of these people, like I said, in America, the phrase I've heard over and over again is, "Well, it's the lesser of two evils."
oh god, yeah, that's a terrible
330
argument.
million people, and you're telling me that our two choices are the lesser of two evils? If that isn't the biggest red flag that your system is broken,
Yeah.
then I don't know what is. And then you allow this senile dipshit or this bright orange asshole to then divide you and throw gasoline on whether it's racial hatred, whether it's this crazy division over vaccines and mandates. I mean, it's time for everyone to just hit Control Alt Delete and remind ourselves that we are a community, and find patriotism, not nationalism. There's two very, very different things. And patriotism involves us investing in our own country, in our own communities, and joining together in this fight against, not just COVID, everything, mental health, physical health. I mean, the whole thing. But right now, we're being allowed to be divided by people who have no business even being in the helm in the first place.
They don't. I remember recently publishing, and it was shocking. In the same day, I stumbled across two videos, one of Biden and one of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, basically fumbling in public. Like the first video was Biden forgetting again what he was actually, the point he was trying to make, and then just saying, oh, whatever, and moving on to the next one. And then the second video, which I shared on my social as well, was Boris Johnson, again, one after the other. Boris Johnson at a conference as the keynote speaker, uh, forgetting the order of his talk or his speech. And it was so embarrassing, and it was so obvious. Like, this is the day and age we're in, where our leaders are not the real leaders. How can they be? If this is the level of leadership, how can they be the ones pulling the strings? How can they be the ones making the decisions? They don't even know what they were thinking or where their notes are. Or Michael Gove, who's a British politician in the cabinet, drunk in the House of Parliament, in plain sight. People are having these get-togethers in private and laughing about it as if they realize something most people don't. What do they know that we don't? Why are they so lax about it? Maybe it's because they don't even believe these measures themselves. And so I get really upset when people tell me, you know, oh, you're paranoid or you're a conspiracy theorist because you believe that the government isn't trying to help us. I mean, just look at the news, just look at what's happening. But ironically, you mentioned social media. Social movements. People should be getting together. People should be bandying together in a time like this. Ironically, I wonder what it would have been like if we weren't all using social media during this time. If, like, for example, we lived in another, dimension where social media hadn't been created. COVID happened, and I feel like we would have been a lot more united, because I feel like one of the mechanisms of keeping us divided is actually social media.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even with so let me be clear as well. We're talking a lot about the the vaccines, for example, being less effective and all that stuff, but really it boils down to caring about not losing people. And I think the vaccinations, if they're going to even make a small difference in the more vulnerable, then excellent. It's a tool. Whether it's the monoclonal antibodies that Joe talks about, if that's working, beautiful. Ivermectin, I have no idea, but if it again has an application, beautiful, but it's still about underlying health. And if we're not talking about that, COVID or no COVID, every paramedic, around the world can tell you that we're losing people, hand over fist, just from the ill health, especially of the more developed nations. So if we're truly caring about health and we want people who are exposed to COVID to survive, if you're not talking about improving their fitness, their nutrition, their mental practice, their sleep, then that's the death toll. COVID and all these other viruses, the average person might feel like they got hit by a truck. They might be asymptomatic, but most people, should be surviving this. And as one of my guests said, I forget who it was now, they were like, the virus doesn't want you to die. You're the host. It wants to reproduce and then move on. But
Interesting.
if you
Yeah.
die, you just took the virus with you. So, that's the thing. So all this, all these measures that we've seen, and then like you said, these kind of snide remarks from these people that are having parties while they're telling the whole country to lock down. It just, you've got to reel it back. If we're worried about COVID deaths, we should be talking about underlying health. If we're worried about deaths outside of COVID, we should be talking about underlying health. If we're worried about the suicide epidemic, we should be talking about underlying health. I mean, all these are tied in. So again, you telling people in Australia you can't leave your porch, or I'm going to fine you $5,000, or I saw one of a shopping mall and there was literally a chain link fence. There's
That was
another,
in Germany,
obviously
I
the
think.
Germany with the whole, and I'd not researched this, but the little soundbite I saw was that disregarding Nuremberg, agreements, and I mean
Yeah.
just all this stuff. But if you haven't been like, we're funding local organic farming and the beaches are open and putting PE back in schools, if those aren't there, you literally have no room to talk about health because you are not walking the walk. If you're worried about deaths, then and you're talking about vaccines and masks, you are not addressing deaths. You are totally disregarding. So don't stand on your platform and say, "Oh, don't be selfish. It's for the health of the nation." You haven't fucking done anything to improve the health of the nation. So that makes
Exactly.
your, opinion a mute point. It really is.
It can't only just be take the vaccine, uh, or stay out of society. There's got to be something else, right? There's got to be something that underpins everything, and it's just not present. Which really shows what the real agenda to me is. It's to sell the vaccine. It's to get submission. It's to wrestle more freedom from people, which is what we're seeing. I mean, I really didn't want things to develop the way they have. I was hopeful that we were going to come out of this, somehow intact, but it just doesn't seem that way anymore. It feels like we've given up. And I personally, changed the brand of the show because of that. I wanted to talk about ways to get people to be more self-aware. I wanted to, and by the way, I am not claiming that I hold the truth to everything. I'm always trying to develop my awareness and how I see situations and try to make better decisions. So by no means am I saying that this show always, has the right information, but the goal is to bring it to light. The goal is to open up the conversation and begin to question things and to try to give, you could say, critical thinking skills. Um, and just try to pull people back to center and from the extremes. I've followed these movements, these social movements, which are, by the way, I feel so convenient at a time when we should be talking about very, very dangerous, uh, life-threatening topics like COVID, or the environment, or whatever you want to. We're talking about very trivial social movements that are dividing everybody, and it's just the perfect timing to keep us distracted. And I see this happening, and I want to pull people back and say, just like you, right? We're both in the same, we're like peas in the pod with this. Let's be logical about it. Let's not fight each other. Let's try to think about a solution and look at the bigger picture. And when you have governments that have leaders that are just puppets, in my opinion, right, for corporate interests, when you have laws in place where you can actually pay politicians to influence legislation, and when corporations have the same rights as human beings. it, are we forgetting about these things all of a sudden? Like, doesn't that just naturally lead to this point right now? I mean, this is the probably the effect of that decades on, that corporations are now the ones pulling the strings, that they're basically just, they don't give a shit, because why would they? They don't give a shit about your health. They give a shit about profits and power. So again, I just I feel very motivated and inspired to help change the conversation. What is it like for you in the United States? You say that you live in Florida now. I think you lived in California before, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And was that because of COVID? Did you make that decision, or because partly because of that?
No, 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 no. My son's mother and I were divorced now, but we got pregnant. We had my little boy, and she wanted to move back to Florida to be close to family. So that was the reason. That was God, what would that have been now? Almost 15 years ago. So way, way before COVID. Yeah.
I see. Okay, I got you. I got you. Um, I don't live in the States. I know that there's been tension between the way that, let's say, the governor of Florida runs his state compared to the governor of California. Do you think um, that the public opinion has shifted more pro freedom?
It's hard to tell because we're all in our own echo chamber. So my echo chamber is, there's a lot of not only medical professionals, but fire, police, military, who seemingly tend to question things a little more because we get to see behind the curtain. We're the ones on the front line. I have so many members of the military that I always ask a specific question, asking their perspective of what they saw overseas. And there's such a middle of the road conversation about at that time there was a job to do. Here's some of the horrible things that we saw, but there's a lot of questioning of why were we over there in the first place. So I see a lot of the people that I surround myself with absolutely pushing back and seeing this as a government overreach times a million. Now, I see some other people because obviously, I've got this amazing spectrum of people around me that completely the other way in their echo chamber. Anyone who's not submitting to vaccines and masks is a selfish, horrible person and is going to get everyone killed. And I don't look down on those people. I just realize that their echo chamber has fed them nothing but that one side. Then, not so much in my circle, but on the very, very fringe, I see the other extreme where it's like it's a conspiracy and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, for fuck's sake. And that's why on the show, for example, I've had friends of mine that were one lost his job and one was being threatened losing his job from the vaccine mandates prior to DeSantis stepping in. And then I've had a good friend of mine who's a doctor in Texas who was working ER and ICU, seeing COVID patients die over and over again, and nearly all of them were unvaccinated. So yes and yes, you know what I mean? These are the truths. But I think, when you, for example, look at New York, California, and let's say hypothetically a lot of them have done what they were asked to do, and 2 years in, still got COVID, then what does that send? Like, it's not working. Has it made a dent? Absolutely. I'm sure, absolutely it's made a dent. But is it a magic pill? No. What are we missing? All the things that we talked about before.
Yeah.
Conversely, in Florida, as much as they try and demonize it, our numbers here have actually been great, and we've been one of the most progressive, I would say, in you know put in initiative, assess, analyze. Okay, I think we can, undo the faucet just a little bit, little bit, little bit. And I've seen that work incredibly well here. And you got to bear in mind, Florida is not known for its healthy population, really, and we're not known for our youthful population. So, and we have some densely populated city, but I think we do have more space, and that's one big thing. Apart from, say, Miami, maybe like inner Tampa. There's a lot of places, even the urban setting still has space. We have a lot of sunlight. We have a lot of places to be outside. So I think that's a big part of it too. But um, so yeah, I mean, with the freedom thing, if Florida looked like the World War Z set right now, then maybe we did it wrong, but
But
that's
it
not the
doesn't.
case. So then I think other states are looking over and going, well, wait a second. Florida hasn't been doing this for all this time. They got all these elderly people, and their numbers are actually lower than ours with vaccines and lockdowns and masks for X amount of months now. Can someone explain this to me?
Right.
So I think that's it. I think people are just finally getting past the hyper triggered phase and actually starting to question things now. And then
Right.
that's why I've done what I've done. As we record this, I think there's 547 episodes out now, free. Each conversation like an hour and a half plus from experts and everything from fitness and nutrition and breath work and
Nice.
then military, police, fire, doctors, nurses, nutritionists, coaches, and so they can go to them. That's just one podcast out of all the, yours and all these other ones out there, Joe Rogan, and then listen to these people and go, wait a second, they were saying this, but now this world expert is actually saying this. And, so I think that's what I'm starting to see. Everyone's done Netflix binging. Everyone's, sick and tired of doing exactly what we were asked to do and not seeing the results that were supposed to happen from it. That I hope that freedom, and freedom coming from a good place, freedom including altruistically wanting everyone to be healthier, save as many lives as we can. I think that's starting to push out, not from the extremes, from the normal people being influenced by some of these other groups. And we're all kind of slowly pushing out and dragnetting more and more of the middle. And then in the end, I hope it's just those two extremes that had all the freaking, airtime before, that we shut down in the middle, 80, 90% finally force normality, which is there are very, very deadly diseases. So we need to do everything we can in our power to minimize the impact. So let's make our people as healthy as possible. If we find, vaccines that are trustworthy and effective, I'm all for it. I had all my jabs done when I was a firefighter. My son's had all his jabs. But, we have to get past this, vaccinations are the miracle pill and masks are going to solve everything, because it's been a 2 year long, study now. And clearly that's not the case. So the
Mm.
answer to me is basically undoing all the damage of the last 80 years, move like our great grandparents, eat like our great grandparents, sleep like our great grandparents. And right there, you would solve probably 90% of the issues that we have.
You know what? I've just thought about this now. Ironically, that might actually be what happens in the coming years if the economy keeps tanking the way it is. You know
Yeah,
what
and
I
it wouldn't be
mean?
bad. I mean, that's the thing. To me, when we talk about evolution, people focus on, technology, we're going to send someone to Mars. Well, firstly, I love Earth, so you can all fuck off to Mars. I'll be staying here, thank you. But yeah, on the other side, to me, true human evolution is the evolution of kindness and compassion. You look back to the Dark Ages, and prior to that, some humans did horrific things in our past. You look at medieval torture and the witch trials, all these things. And I think that people are truly becoming kinder and kinder and kinder. And I think that's why there's this resistance and these few that want to control us, because they don't want us to care about each other. You can't profit off kindness and
I just want
compassion
to
and
touch on that
health.
for a second because that right there is essentially where people will come in and say, "Oh my God, here we go again," right? Uh, but what you're saying is very obvious to me. It's very logical to me, and I can't help but keep talking about it because I think that's the problem. And I recently listened to a lady on Russell Brand's podcast, which is an amazing podcast, and I highly recommend it. And I don't agree with everything he says, but it's just a very entertaining way to see things differently and open your mind to different ways of thinking. And he had Vadana Shiva on, I think recently is her name. And at first glance, you don't, and this just shows, it's quite embarrassing. It just shows how judgmental I probably am as a person. But at first glance, she doesn't seem like a particularly well read or very intelligent person. She just looks like a normal Indian lady. But when she starts speaking, wow, do you start to pay attention because she unearths all of the knowledge and um, the wisdom that is beholden to her, and you can't help but kind of be taken away by the way that she sees things, and it just makes so much sense. And what she said was, uh, you see, over time, power seems to consolidate, and that power is not a great way it's not a great thing for humankind in general, because when you consolidate power and wealth, it ends up taking it from the rest of the people. So you got 99% of the people on the planet that are struggling, and then you've got like the 1% who are kind of constantly thinking of new ways, constantly devising new plans to grow, to just because that's the way it is, and that's the way it's always been. You just have to read history books to figure it out, right? And you don't even have to go back that far. You can see many conspiracy theories that deal with this kind of corporate greed have become true. And Edward Snowden is a great example of that, who's still on the run, who's still um, you know, uh, being uh, pursued by governments because of the secrets that he uncovered, and they were real, and they were very pervasive, and just not the kind of thing you would expect from public servants, right? But these public servants, like I said, they're not really, in my opinion. And I don't want people to think that this is a conspiracy theory podcast. But the point I'm trying to make is, when you say something like that you just said, to me, it's completely clear what you mean. And you're not talking about like child, eating children, right? Or just some of the weird QAnon stuff that you hear online. That's not what you're talking about. You're talking about something very logical, that's trackable, traceable through history. The fact that power consolidates and just doesn't represent the best interests of regular people anymore, because how could it? So the point that I was trying to make was, I think that is going to be a very difficult thing to unravel. And I think until we do, we're going to continue to see this fragmentation of society. We're going to continue to see these events happen that, force us to give up our freedoms, force us to give up our wealth, to be taxed, to be and I don't know what you think about that, but what is the solution to this? How do we get to the point where we have better leaders if corporations are lobbying governments and they continue to do so?
Well, think of it in the tribal way. Um, Sebastian Junger's been on here a couple of times, and his book Tribe is spot on. It should be a must read for everyone. I think it should be, on the list in schools. Incredible. But when you put it into a tribal setting, and he always talks about the Iroquois. I think with the Native American tribes seems to be one of the most squared away dynamics. But imagine, Steve, to give him a Western name for a second, Steve the selfish Native American in the Iroquois, and he wants all the buffalo or all the corn, you name it, all the thing that the whole community needs to share out. What's going to happen to him? He's going to be cast out, if not strung from a tree, you know. But yet in the West, for some reason, not just the West, but in cultures, for some reason, I think we just get so big that cancer is allowed to grow until we realize, and it's too late then. And
There's no
I'll give you a
accountability.
perfect
Yeah.
example. Something I've been thinking about recently. Take slavery. I went to the Slavery Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. And again, absolute must visit for certainly every American school trip, I think. So the Europeans, British, very much so, were the ones that were in Africa actually buying the slaves. Okay, again, that's because whether it's slave owners selling slaves that they captured from other tribes, where they're even selling their own people, you've got corruption even in the African tribes themselves. So then you get, in this case, the British. So then they're slave trading. Okay, they then bring the slaves to the U.S. They trade them for cotton, tobacco, whatever it is, and then they sail back clean hands, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just bringing tobacco," and then make a shitload of money. In the meantime, the American slave, owners purchased these human beings that were stolen from another country, and then they used them to basically farm for free and make incredible wealth. So now fast forward to today, and you're like, oh, white people are all racist, slavery, all this stuff. And I go, okay, well, let's reverse engineer for a second. How many people do you think actually gained directly? I'm not talking about the ripple effect, which people have pointed out. Well, America is what it is because of slavery. I'm talking about then, that moment when that cancer was able to thrive. How many regular American people, the people in the prairies, and just trying to forge a life, or the people in the UK were getting rich from slavery? Next to no one. And if you actually look, when slavery was going on, Britain was at one of the most poorest times in its history. So the average person was not benefiting from slavery and had no idea it was even going on. And the same in the US. You had the plantation owners, but I guarantee you look generally around there was extreme poverty going on then too, because there would have been even less work. I'm not going to pay an American when I can, buy a slave. So that is a perfect example. Now, fast forward all the pain and misery that created. Yes, it created wealth. Yes, Americans can have an iPhone. But if you ask someone, hey, we're going to be a more affluent country materially if we use slavery, are you up for it? Most people would be like, fuck no, I'm not. But steal human beings and incarcerate them and, beat them and, if, kill them if they don't even make the trip over just so that I can have more stuff? Have you lost your fucking mind? But that's what happens. So that is when the few get to commit incredible atrocities at the expense of the many. And so how we do it now is we take this media, this free media, meaning not CNN and Fox and all these filtered, fucking politically leaned, poor excuses for media outlets that we have, but true open source media, whether it's podcasts, some of these amazing documentaries, using social media for the right reason. And if it gets shut down, finding another platform that someone creates where you can have open dialogue and join together and tell the tribe, hey, this is going on. And the other 99% saying, no, that's not going to happen anymore. And one of the things that's really disgusted me about the business world is this kind of like holy grail that is the monopoly. So you want to have all the money and you want to shut down everyone else in that business space, and that's held with high regard in this country. That's a
Mm.
fucking horrible, horrible philosophy. I don't want a mega farm to make all the food for the entire United States of America. I want every city and town to have local farms that farm clean food that removes the need to drive it hundreds of thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles, across country or continents even, to have to irradiate it and cover it in chemicals so it doesn't rot and root. I want to have my local farmer, Steve, I like to use the word Steve, to feed the local town with clean, chemical free food. You know what I mean? And local people work that farm. And so when we realize that we are a nation made up of small communities that make up the tapestry of the UK, Colombia, the United States, wherever, I think that's it. And we use that information, those knowledge sharing and communication applications that we have now, to band together and push against this corrupt system. Because you're right. How many times you see the news and, oh, this African country, it's so corrupt. Dude, why do you think we have 70% obese and overweight Americans? Because farms and pharmaceutical companies, and you name the list, that have been lobbying, have taken what was an incredibly outdoors focused, healthy nation and fucking destroyed it.
Hmm.
So that is it. Like, we have to educate. As I always say, we got to, get people educated and angry. And not angry in a burn the place down, angry in a enough is enough. Let's join together and demand a new system.
That's a really good point that you made just now. Angry, not in terms of burn the place down, because that's what's happening. That's what happens when people get angry, and there's no funneling of that energy into something productive. And I think people are like, one thing that I did research and kind of come to the conclusion about is that when you force people to go and do nothing, right, which is essentially what the quarantine did for a lot of people, the lockdown, they lose their meaning of purpose. And when you lose your meaning of purpose, you look for it somewhere else. And you can find it in not so great things, or you can find it in great things. And with social media, like I said, I think it's very easy to find purpose in things like, the social movements of today that in many ways don't serve the best interests of everyone at large. So yeah, so that is an incredibly important thing to take into account, is that when you, and we're seeing a huge drop off in jobs in places like the United States, and people are claiming that it's just not fulfilling for them anymore. And I can get that, because there's a lot of terrible jobs out there and people make bad short-term decisions, and they don't think about their overall happiness. So I can understand that to a certain degree, but as far as I can tell, a lot of that may be in fact due to the fact that these people have lost their purpose or their sense of purpose, and they don't find it in their job anymore, and it's having a devastating effect on the economy. And I think that in 2022, unless you can somehow convince me otherwise, I feel like we're going to be in for a lot more of the same, and we need to be very conscious of that and try our best to make the right kind of choices so that we can start to pull ourselves out of this cycle. Because I definitely do not want to see what it's like if we continue on this path. I think it's going to be tragic.
Well,
And
let me
people don't see the impact that this is having in other parts of the world. This is another thing that, I mean, I know that you have to leave soon, um, but we are isolated in our little bubbles here in your country and my country. We don't I say my country, but what I mean is the United Kingdom. I live in Colombia right now, and there's a reason for that. But um, we don't get the direct impact this has on people around the world. Like in India, for example, you've got farmers committing suicide because they can't survive, they can't provide, they can't produce. Um, it's having a devastating impact on people that are part of the supply chain, and we don't see that, and we don't recognize it. And so, how can we empathize? How can we have the big picture? When we're not even privy to these things.
Well, you said about people making choices, and I think that's another dangerous thing. Oh, well, we need the government because people aren't good at making choices. Well, think about the environment. Horrible choice is to stuff food in your mouth, okay, and not move. And that's what's created this obesity epidemic that we have here in the US. And, I've managed to stay in shape despite the environment that I'm in. The environment I'm in doesn't foster good nutrition, doesn't, there's not like great access to healthy outlets here. If I drive down 200, which is our main kind of artery road in Ocala, it's just fast food left, right, all the way down, neon lights, and that's your options. So yes, ownership is important. Okay, and I think I'm very lucky. I grew up on a farm in England, so exercise and good nutrition were indoctrinated in me early on. So everything else, I was like, yeah, but I had the tools to question all the bad shit. And don't get me wrong, I have burgers and everything so often, every so often.
Oh God, yeah, I
Um,
love them.
you know, yeah. So I'm not being a hypocrite. Like it's not like I'm abstaining completely, but um, you
Everything in
have to
moderation, right?
yeah, well, you have to think about the environment. So, why is it just the last few decades that obesity has gone through the roof, that we've even discovered what type 2 diabetes is? I mean, all these things, the cancer epidemic, all these are just magnifying since we started industrializing food. So, when you have a country, for example, again, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, where the whole infrastructure is set up for health, you end up with a healthy nation. Are the Swedes better people than the Americans and they just randomly make better choices? No. They are human beings like everyone else on the planet that's being given an opportunity to thrive. Are the people in the very, very densely populated areas in India given a chance for great nutrition and no exposure to carcinogens? No, they grow up in Delhi or some of these places that are set up for failure again. So to me, it's up to the government to create an environment for people to thrive. You don't have to make people make decisions. If there's ill health in your country, that's not on the people. That's a lack of leadership. So a lot of the countries you see around the world, and Sweden was ridiculed at the beginning, their
Absolutely.
death rate was very, very low because they
Yes.
have a healthy population, period. Look at Okinawa. Some of the I think the most people over 100 per capita on that island than anyone else around the world, and their longevity through this has been incredible.
Hmm.
So I hate that when people say, "Oh, we need government because people don't know how to make good decisions." That means that the governments prior have failed, because if you create an
Or when we
environment.
say, yes, let's vaccinate everybody, and you're talking about a very small percentage of the planet that is incredibly unhealthy. But like for example, in the United States, the a lot of the global policy comes from just watching what happens in the U.S. But if you have people giving in to a vaccine mandate in a country that's incredibly unhealthy because the people are scared they're going to die, they don't understand the connection between, their health and their chances of mortality, it has devastating impacts on the rest of the world because the rest of the world's like, oh my God, maybe we should do it.
Yeah, and also it shows a lack of education. So if you
Yes.
have basic microbiology, a basic understanding of virology, for example, if I can smell cigarette smoke from half a block away through my mask, then that means that a virus can definitely get into my mask. I mean, that's just like a basic 101 thing. But yeah, understanding how to build a resilient, immune human being and all the parts and pieces that are there. So yeah, I mean, this whole, oh, we need government because people don't know how to make their decisions. I think that's a disgusting statement in itself, but secondly, that points directly back to the government, because if you haven't created the environment, and the war on drugs, perfect example, to tangent for a second, why are people fleeing Mexico? Because the illicit drug market that we created, the black market trade, empowering the underworld through this ridiculous notion that by making drugs illegal, we're going to fix addiction and mental health epidemic, has now empowered so many horrendous people that we have the gang culture in the US. We have this horrendous, issue at the border with the Mexican cartels. And, conversely, you take that away, you take the ability to make money from illicit drugs, you cut the head off the snake. Maybe you won't have people pouring out of Mexico into the US. But no, let's just build a fucking wall. That'll fix it. It
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense. But again, it's having the balls to look back and say, you know what, that was wrong, and we're going to start today fixing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and that's kind of my 2 cents, as they say.
Well, I mean, I live in Colombia. Colombia has a really deep history with drugs, cartels. They still exist today, and I still recognize when I see them and I hear about them all the time. But what happened was there was difficult decisions that were made which resulted in very strong policies, and they curbed the whole trade, and they kind of almost privatized it in a way, which isn't the best scenario, but it's definitely meant that Colombia now can flourish as an economy. And throughout the pandemic, people have just gotten on with their lives. There have been lockdowns, but nothing serious. The economy is actually doing really well here at the moment. And it follows a similar approach to, let's say, Florida, where people are given their freedom to do what they need to do to survive, to provide for their family. They're happier, they're able to socialize, they're able to get out and have sun and things. So, you know, I just wanted to share that. I moved to Colombia not only because of the fact that the United Kingdom's becoming very authoritarian and doesn't make sense, a lot of the policies that are happening, and there's a lot of hypocrisy in the government, and I can't stand it. But for whoever is listening to this, just be aware that wherever you are, if it doesn't make sense to you, but you feel like you need to follow it anyway, just look at what's happening in other countries. It doesn't have to be that way, and you can, raise your voice. You can talk about it, which I actually would love to hear. Read in a book of yours. I think that if you were to write a book about this, it would be a massive hit because you're very well versed in it. You've got a very balanced argument. You can see things from both sides. You can articulate things very well. Have you ever given that any thought?
Not specifically about this. I am actually about to write a second book. Um, it will be a fiction because I think the first one I did was was real. It was stories from my life and my firefighting and paramedic career, and then obviously lessons learned kind of tied in. But um, there will be elements of this, I'm sure, in the characters. It's literally
Nice.
fetal. It's like two cells at the moment. So, um, but I've got the concept. I know how I want it to be, but it's just like the last one took a long time before I really
That
put
is
pen to
great
paper. But
news. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect you were going to do a fictional book. That's really cool.
yeah, yeah, because friction gives you the latitude then, to deviate from what's actually happened, and obviously there will 100% be a lot of influence from the real world calls that I've been on, and the people, and even these conversations. But my my kind of goal, and I can almost see it as a film as well. I mean, who knows? But when you really get sucked into a great book or a great film, you really get to unravel the background of characters, and I think that's what's missing. Where there's so much knee jerk at the moment, so many like shallow arguments, and addiction's a perfect example.
Mm,
People don't talk about oh well, were you a soldier? Were you on the battleground? Oh, forget that. What happened before we even put the uniform on?
right.
Oh, so that happened to you, or what happened to your parents? But you know what I mean. So you can just pull back the layers of the onion and really kind of find the nucleus of a story. So I have a concept, I have an idea of some of the characters, but yeah, I hope that it's a kind of book where if I'm able to write it properly, when people go down, put the book down, finally they'll be like, you know, it will sow seeds. It may not even resonate right there, but it will sow seeds and get people to question things. But yeah, so we'll
Love
see.
it.
And then whether there's a kind of an ability to tie in some of this stuff into the narrative. I wouldn't want it to be about this particular thing, but I'm sure there'll be parallels.
That sounds really interesting. I'm super excited for it. And if you need me to be part of the focus group, I'm all for it, man.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a really good point where we can close this off. And I really appreciate you coming on, man. Again, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been always a good conversation, and I don't normally do you know open chats like this, and not that's a bad thing at all, but usually there's a focus on, like I said, fire police, health, wellness, specific topics. But it's been good just to come in blindly and just have an open conversation, and I think that's just it. Most people agree, on those things that are truly important to, whether it's a single person, whether it's a family, and if it doesn't align with your family's safety, feeding your family, put a roof over their head, watching them grow up, helping them become kind, compassionate people as they grow up. If anything that we see people tearing each other apart about doesn't align with simply those core values, then I think that's the nucleus to start. If you found yourself off away from that, recenter. Is everything that we're talking about the health? Are we truly making people safer and healthier? And if we're not, then what's missing? Let's bring that in. If it's solely being ignored, okay, well then I'm going to question some of the things that these people are saying.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. No, it's been an excellent conversation. And I think these are the kind of conversations that have a deeper impact on people because you can script things when it comes to speaking specifically about certain topics, but when it's an open free form conversation, it's really difficult to do that, and people get to see the more intimate side of you, how you think, what your real thoughts are, your real values and principles. And I can't think of a better guy to do it with. So thanks again. Hopefully we'll do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you, mate.